It stormed over Caldwell County the night the last of the light left the sky, and Nora Aldridge had 51 years of hard living packed into a Subaru with a cracked taillight and maybe 12 minutes left to find shelter before the sky turned green. She stood in the gravel driveway of the farmhouse she'd spent her entire adult life caring for. The house where she'd nursed her father through 3 winters of congestive heart failure, tracked his medications on a whiteboard above the kitchen sink, slept in the recliner beside his bed so she'd hear him if he called out in the night, holding a cardboard box of toiletries and her father's Bible, like a guest being shown to the door. Which was, apparently, exactly what her half-brother Derek now considered her to be. But here's what nobody knew was coming that night. Not Derek, not the county, not the lawyers, and not even Nora herself. Sometimes the worst storms bring you exactly where you need to go. Let me tell you how it happened. Harold Aldridge had been a good man. Not flashy, not the kind who told you he loved you every other sentence, but the kind of good that shows up in the doing. 30 years as a civil engineer for the state of Virginia. Retirement spent tending 11 acres on Ridgecut Road outside Boone. A vegetable garden that got too big every summer. A handshake you could take to the bank. He'd raised Nora alone after her mother died when Nora was 9. He'd done it without complaint and without asking for credit, which is the hardest way to do anything. He remarried in his late 50s to a woman named Connie who had a teenage son. Derek was 17 when Harold married Connie, old enough to have already decided who he was and what he thought of the world. He never called Harold Dad. He called him Harold, always with a faint, particular emphasis that communicated, without ever saying it plainly, that he considered his presence in the farmhouse a temporary arrangement he intended to outlast. Connie died 4 years in. Derek, by then in his mid-20s, moved to Charlotte. He called Harold maybe twice a year, usually around Thanksgiving, usually when he needed something small, a reference, a cosign, an awkward favor Harold was too decent to refuse. Nora never said a word about any of it to her father. Harold had loved Connie, which meant he'd wanted to love Connie's son too, and Nora respected that even when the wanting ran in only one direction. For the last 3 years of Harold's life, she was the one who was there. She'd given up her bookkeeping job at a dental practice in Roanoke when his heart started failing in earnest. No dramatic announcement, no tearful goodbye to her apartment. She just went home, moved her things back into her old bedroom, and learned everything there was to learn about what was happening to her father's body. The names of his cardiologists and his pharmacist, which medications made him dizzy, which made him nauseous, which combination meant she needed to sit with him for an hour after to make sure he kept his lunch down. She drove him to appointments in Boone and Asheville, and once, for a specialist, all the way to Winston-Salem and back in a single day. She managed his calendar, his insurance correspondence, his grocery order, his blood pressure log. Harold died on a Tuesday in June. He went quietly in his own bed, with Nora holding his right hand, and the window cracked just enough to let in the sound of the garden. Derek arrived 2 days later in a silver BMW, spotless in a way that looked deliberate for a gravel road. He stood in the driveway in a pale blue polo and khaki pants, scanning the property with the eyes of a man doing arithmetic. He didn't go into the bedroom. He didn't ask where Harold's things were. He reached into his back seat, produced a manila envelope, and held it out to Nora before he'd even shaken her hand. "The estate attorney reviewed everything," he said, still looking at the barn. "It's all in order." Inside was a photocopy of Harold's will, dated September 14th of the previous year, leaving the farmhouse, the acreage, the accounts, and all personal property to Derek R. Aldridge. Nora read it once, then again. Then she sat down on the porch steps because her legs had apparently decided they were done cooperating. "He updated it last fall," Derek said from somewhere above her, "wanted things handled simply. No back and forth." No back and forth. She turned the phrase over in her mind. She'd given up 3 years of her own life to be here. Her savings, her career, whatever else her 50s might have held. Not because anyone asked her to, not because a document required it, but because Harold was her father, and he needed her, and that was simply what you did. And Derek, who had visited 6 times in 3 years and left the same day each time, was going to get the house. She called Rebecca Marsh that afternoon, an attorney in downtown Boone who'd handled Harold's previous legal work, the kind of woman who answered the phone without performing warmth she didn't mean. Nora explained. Rebecca listened without interrupting, asked her to bring in whatever documents she had, and said she'd request the probate filing and compare signatures. But legal review takes time. Derek's attorney had already sent a certified letter informing Nora that, as the named beneficiary and sole legal owner of the Ridgecut Road property, Derek was within his rights to request she vacate within 30 days. That had been 29 days ago. The month she spent packing was the worst of her life, and not because of the packing itself, but because of the specific grinding humiliation of dismantling your own life, piece by piece in the house where you grew up, under the technical authority of someone who hadn't earned a single square foot of it. She found an apartment in Boone with a parking lot view and signed a lease she couldn't fully afford, off the emergency fund she'd been quietly depleting for 3 years, while living on Harold's Social Security checks. She packed her mother's dishes, her father's books, the framed embroidery her grandmother had made that had hung in the kitchen since before Nora was born. She made herself do it methodically, without feeling it, the way you do when feeling it would stop you from functioning. On the 29th day, Derek came back, with a man named Vance Tillett, a regional representative for Meridian Agricultural Holdings, a corporate farming operation that had spent the better part of a decade systematically acquiring small Virginia hill farms. Tillett walked every inch of the property with a clipboard and a measuring wheel, while Derek trailed a few paces behind, nodding at intervals, occasionally pointing at the fence lines with the proprietary confidence of a man who'd owned something for years, rather than weeks. Nora watched from the kitchen window with a cold cup of coffee in her hand. Rebecca called that evening, her voice doing the thing it did when she had something significant to say, and was choosing her words carefully. "The September will look legitimate on its surface," she said. "The signature matches Harold's at a glance. But the notary who witnessed it, a man named Gary Potts, runs a shipping and mailbox storefront near Derek's old apartment in Charlotte. That's over 200 miles from here. Harold used my office and the county clerk for everything legal for 15 years. Using an out-of-area notary for something this consequential, without ever mentioning it to me, isn't consistent with how he operated." "What does that mean?" Nora said, though she already knew. "It means I have questions," Rebecca said. "I've left a message with the notary's office, and I'm requesting the original from probate for a signature analysis. Give me a few more days." A few more days. Derek's deadline was tonight. He'd been pleasant about it in the specific way. People are pleasant when their lawyers deliver the bad news for them. The pleasantness of a man who knows he's already won. He'd even mentioned, offhandedly, that a locksmith was coming Friday morning to change the locks before the property assessor arrived. By 11 Thursday night, Nora had made 4 trips to her car. Harold's army photograph, him at 23 in dress uniform, smiling at something just outside the frame, was wrapped in a dish towel on the passenger seat because she couldn't find the right box for it and wasn't going to leave it behind. She'd left the recliner. She couldn't move it alone, and she wasn't going to ask Derek to help her carry her father's chair out of her father's house. She was on her 5th trip, carrying the cardboard box with her remaining toiletries and Harold's annotated King James Bible, when the siren split the night open. Nora had grown up in this valley. She'd heard tornado sirens before. This one had a different quality. Longer, more continuous, the kind that means take it seriously right now. And when she looked southwest, what she saw confirmed it. The sky was the color of a bruise backlit from inside, that yellowish green with no name outside of weather events. flickering with horizontal lightning. The trees along the fence line went absolutely still. Then the wind shifted in a way she felt on the back of her neck before she heard it. The farmhouse had no basement. Harold had always meant to pour one and never gotten around to it. The only underground shelter on the property was the root cellar her grandfather had cut into the hillside behind the barn. Poured concrete, cedar-lined, built in the 1940s and maintained by 3 generations of people who respected bad weather. Harold had stocked it with water, a battery lantern, a transistor radio, and had sent Nora down there 3 times in her childhood when the sky looked like this. She set the box down in the driveway, grabbed the kitchen flashlight off the hook by the back door, punched her father's birthday into the door lock. She had until midnight, and it was 11:54, and ran. The wind was serious by the time she crossed the yard. The barn door banged loose and rhythmic, like something angry trying to get out. Leaves and grit scoured her cheek. The rotation was visible now in the clouds to the southwest, a slow, nauseating churn that made the world feel sideways. She hit the cellar hatch at a dead run, hauled up the rope pull, dropped down the 3 concrete steps, and yanked the door closed above her head just as the wind grabbed at it with both hands. Dark, damp earth, old cedar, concrete sealed from weather for 80 years. Her flashlight cut a cone through the black. She found the battery lantern on the second shelf, pressed the button, got a dim amber glow. Enough. She sat on the bottom step, held her own hands, and listened to the storm build. The next 40 minutes were the most afraid she'd been since the cardiologist in Winston-Salem had used the phrase aggressive progression. The freight train sound came and went twice. Not directly overhead, she thought, but close enough that she didn't look away from the door for a long time. She sat with her hands between her knees and waited for the world above her to decide what it was going to do. Then, gradually, the moan faded. The rattling eased. The particular silence of a storm's aftermath settled over everything. The silence of birds and insects shocked into quiet, of water draining off surfaces, of a county catching its breath. Nora exhaled something she'd been holding for 45 minutes. She stood. Her knee caught the cedar shelving unit on the right wall, and it shifted. Not fixed to the concrete, she realized, just standing against it. In the gap between the shelf and the wall, at floor level, pushed all the way into the corner, was a shape that didn't belong there. A rectangle of dull olive green, the size of a large shoebox, almost invisible in the amber light. She crouched down and worked her fingers behind the shelf unit. It was heavy, military surplus, a steel document box, army issue, the kind Harold had kept in his home office for decades. He'd always called it his important box. She'd assumed he'd moved it inside years ago. The hasp was locked with a 4-digit combination. She tried Harold's birthday, nothing. Her mother's birthday, nothing. She sat back on her heels in the orange lantern light with her father's padlock in her hands, and after a moment tried the one remaining combination she could think of. June 19th, the day her parents were married, a date only the 2 of them had ever thought to memorize. 0619. The lock clicked. Inside, sealed in a Ziploc freezer bag, were 3 items: a white envelope labeled in Harold's careful print, Last Will and Testament of Harold James Aldridge, a manila envelope, and a folded sheet of yellow legal pad paper. Nora unfolded the legal pad first. The handwriting was her father's, precise, slightly left-leaning, the print of a man who'd spent his career reading blueprints and trusted clarity over sentiment. It was dated May 3rd, 11 weeks before he died. Nora, if you're reading this, then I wasn't able to tell you in person, and I'm sorry for that. There are things I should have said out loud that I kept inside too long. That's a habit of mine that I know has cost you. 2 months ago, I found out that money has been leaving my accounts without my knowledge. I went back through the statements with Rebecca, and we identified 17 withdrawals over 18 months, between $400 and $1,200 each, through a payment app on my phone I never set up or authorized. I did not confront Derek. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and I was tired in a way that made confrontation feel like more than I could manage. But I need you to know what I know. I asked Rebecca to draw up a new will in April. The old one, from after Connie died, split things between you and Derek because I believed it was right to try. I don't believe that anymore. The new will is in this box. It leaves everything to you, all of it. You earned this, Nora. You have been here every single day. He has not been here at all. I put this here because I was afraid Derek might look for a document box after I was gone. He's seen it in my office. He knows it exists. I thought, hide the real one somewhere a Caldwell County kid knows to go when the weather turns bad. Trust the storm to send the right person. Tell Rebecca right away. She'll know what to do from there. I love you, kiddo. I'm sorry I was slow about saying so. Dad. She read it 4 times. The 4th time she was crying. Not the fog and grief crying she'd been doing for a month, but the clean, clear kind that comes when something finally locks into place. Her father had known. He'd done the math quietly on his own, with the methodical patience of a man who'd spent his life reading what the numbers said. He'd protected her without telling her, because telling her would have meant a confrontation he didn't have the energy for, and he'd trusted her to find it because he knew her better than anyone. He'd chosen the combination from a date Derek had never had any reason to memorize. Her parents' anniversary. The white envelope held 4 pages. Harold's actual will dated April 29th, bearing the notarial seal of Rebecca's paralegal and the signature of a woman from the Caldwell County Library who'd known Harold for 20 years. Properly witnessed. Properly executed. Leaving every inch of the Ridgecut Road property, every account, everything, to Nora Louise Aldridge. The manila envelope held a year of bank statements with the withdrawals highlighted in yellow and a 2-page summary in Rebecca's handwriting. Patterns noted, amounts totaled, a number underlined at the bottom, $14,340. Derek had stolen $14,000 from their father over 18 months, while Harold was too sick and too tired and too decent to want to believe it. Nora put everything back in the freezer bag, back in the box, tucked the box under her arm, climbed out of the cellar into the cool, rain-washed August air, and called Rebecca Marsh at 1:17 a.m. Rebecca answered on the 2nd ring. "The storm didn't get you," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "The storm gave me something," Nora said, and told her everything. The silence on Rebecca's end lasted long enough that Nora could hear her own heartbeat. Then, "Where are you right now?" "The driveway." "Stay there. Don't touch anything else in the box. Chain of custody matters." Keyboard clicking, papers moving. "I'm calling the probate court's emergency line, and I'm calling Detective Brooke Saunders at the sheriff's office. I've worked with Brooke on estate fraud before. She's thorough and she's fast. A beat. Now what time is Derek signing with Meridian?" 9 a.m. at the county clerk's office. Another pause, longer this time. "Then we have 7 hours," Rebecca said. "Let's not waste them." By 2:30 in the morning, the Ridgecut Road driveway held 2 cars that hadn't been there before, Rebecca's Volvo and a Caldwell County Sheriff's cruiser. Detective Brooke Saunders was a compact woman in her 40s, close-cropped hair going grey at the temples, with the economy of movement that comes from years spent in rooms where people lie to you, and you can't afford to waste energy. She went to the root cellar first, before anything was moved or disturbed, and photographed the box in place, the open hasp, the interior, before the documents were removed. She bagged the legal pad letter separately from the will. Then she sat at the kitchen table with Harold's bank statements spread out in front of her and went through them line by line against the probate copy of the September will, her expression steady and unsurprised. The look of someone who's watched this exact story play out in enough variations to recognize the shape of it early. "The September will's notary is Gary Potts," Rebecca said from across the table. "Runs a pack and ship store in Charlotte, near Derek's old apartment. I haven't been able to reach him, but the county clerk's office has his contact on file from the probate submission." I can reach him, Saunders said. She picked up her phone, made a call Nora couldn't quite follow, made another, set the phone down. Gary Potts has no record of notarizing any document for Harold Aldridge. He's providing a written statement to that effect by 6 a.m. She looked at Nora steadily. Your half-brother used a notary's stamp without authorization. That's a separate charge from the forgery itself. What does all of this add up to? Nora asked, though she could already see the shape of the answer. Foras of a testamentary instrument. Elder financial exploitation. Fraudulent submission to probate court. Saunders folded her hands on the table. He made some significant errors in judgment. The Caldwell County Clerk's office sat in a squat brick building on Depot Street that also housed the county assessor and the register of deeds. At 8:53 Friday morning, the second-floor conference room had been arranged for a corporate signing. A pitcher of ice water, a pastry tray from a bakery 2 blocks over, a retractable Meridian Agricultural Holdings banner leaning against the window. Vance Tillett was there with 2 colleagues and a company attorney, who wore the air of a man who'd attended many closings and found them tediously routine. Derek arrived at 8:58, in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no tie. The studied casual of a man trying to look like someone who does deals like this regularly. He pushed open the conference room door, started to say something to Tillett, and saw Nora. She was standing against the far wall in yesterday's jeans and flannel shirt, a cup of coffee in hand that she'd stopped tasting an hour ago. She hadn't rehearsed an expression. She was simply there. Derek's stride broke, just slightly, just for a step before he recovered it. But she saw. Nora. His voice was careful, pressing toward pleasant. This is a private business meeting. You're not... Mr. Aldridge. Detective Saunders came through the door behind him, badge already out. 2 uniformed deputies followed, and Rebecca Marsh behind them with her briefcase, and the room went very quiet, very fast. Vance Tillett set down his pastry. I'm Detective Brooke Saunders, Caldwell County Sheriff's Office, she said, looking only at Derek. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of filing a forged testamentary instrument in probate court elder, financial exploitation, and fraud in the execution of an estate transfer. She let that settle. You have the right to remain silent. Derek's face ran through its options quickly, confusion first, then the calculating look of a man running exits and angles, then something that might have been the beginning of performed outrage. He pointed at Nora. This is a family grievance. She's doing this out of spite, because she didn't get what she thought she deserved. Rebecca set her briefcase on the conference table and unlatched it. She produced a certified copy of Harold's real will, the April 29th one, bearing her office seal and the signatures of 2 credible, local, entirely verifiable witnesses, and laid it squarely in front of Vance Tillett. This is the legally executed last will and testament of Harold James Aldridge, she said, in the tone of a woman who was very confident and very done arguing. Signed 6 weeks before his death, properly witnessed, properly notarized. The document submitted to probate court in September bears a forged signature and was notarized using a stamp belonging to a Charlotte businessman who has given a sworn statement to law enforcement that he never witnessed any document for Harold Aldridge. She tapped the real will. Meridian Agricultural Holdings does not have a cellar with clean legal title. This transaction cannot proceed. Tillett looked at the will. He looked at his company attorney, who read the first page, then the second, and gave him a look that communicated everything with great efficiency. Tillett quietly put his pen back in his pocket. Vance. Derek's voice had cracked slightly, gone too fast. Vance, this is all going to be straightened out by Monday. We can reschedule. Meridian needs to consult with our legal team before any further discussion on this property, Tillett said. He stood, buttoned his jacket, picked up his briefcase. His colleagues followed. His attorney walked out without looking back at anyone. The deputies stepped forward. Derek turned to Nora, not with rage, which she had expected and braced for, but with something quieter and worse, The bewilderment of a man who had genuinely never believed he could be caught, who had made a calculation about his half-sister, about what she would accept, about how much fight she had left after 3 years of caregiving, and had been completely wrong. "You were supposed to just leave," he said, almost to himself. "You were just supposed to take the apartment and go." Nora thought about her father, lying in bed with his bank statements, doing arithmetic he didn't want to do, writing a letter he couldn't bear to deliver in person. She thought about him choosing a combination from the one date that had only ever mattered to the family Derek had never fully joined. "He hid a letter in the root cellar," she said. "Told me to go there when the weather turned bad." She looked at her half-brother across the quiet room. "It stormed last night, Derek." The deputies walked him out through the Register of Deeds hallway, down the stairs, and through the glass front door into the Friday morning light. Nora watched through the window until the cruiser pulled away from the curb. Then she sat down in one of the conference room chairs and drank the rest of her cold coffee. The case resolved faster than estate fraud usually does. Harold's real will was validated by the probate court within 3 weeks of the arrest. The September will was formally invalidated. The bank records went into evidence. The notary's statement confirmed the forgery. Derek's attorney negotiated a plea agreement in October. Guilty on the forgery and financial exploitation charges. Full restitution of the $14,340, 5 years of probation. The elder financial exploitation charge carried particular weight. There wasn't much sympathy in the courtroom for a man who'd been draining a sick father's accounts while his stepsister managed the medications and drove the 4-hour round trips to the specialists. Meridian Agricultural Holdings never reached back out. Nora kept the farm. The recliner stayed in the living room where she'd left it. She put off moving it because she didn't entirely want to. It sat through the whole autumn in the spot Harold had chosen for it, angled toward the window that caught the morning light, as if waiting for someone to sit down. She sat in it on the evening the probate ruling came through, a cup of tea in hand, watching the last of the light go gold through the western window, and told her father the whole story from start to finish. She thought he would have liked Brooke Saunders. She thought he would have especially liked the part about the storm. In the spring, she converted Harold's home office into something she called the Harold Aldridge Caregiver Support Program. Not a grand operation, no board, no fundraising gala, just a room with folding chairs, a good coffee maker, a small lending library, and a connection to a social worker in Boone who knew which resources were real and which were just paperwork. Once a month, family caregivers from Caldwell County came and sat in those folding chairs and talked to each other. People doing what Nora had done, showing up every day without recognition, often at real personal cost because someone they loved needed them to. Harold's army photograph went up on the wall above the bookshelf, properly framed now, with a matte and good glass. On the first night the room was open, Nora stood in the doorway and looked at it for a while. Her father at 23 in dress uniform, smiling at something just outside the frame, the same private, sideways happiness she'd known her whole life, never performing for the camera, never performing for anyone. She thought about what he'd written. "You have been here, he hasn't." She thought that might be the truest measure of anything. Not what you're given, not what you're named in a document, not how clean your car is when you pull into someone else's driveway. Just whether you showed up, whether you stayed. Nora Aldridge walked into a storm cellar with a flashlight and walked out with her father's final act of love under her arm. She didn't have a plan, a trump card, or a clever scheme. She had 3 years of doing the hard, quiet work, a lock combination only she would think to try, and a father who'd trusted the weather to finish what he'd started. Some storms, it turns out, bring you exactly home. If this story hit something real for you, if you've been the one who showed up, or you know someone who was, share it. It only takes a second, and it might reach someone who needs to hear it today. Hit like if you believe the people who do the quiet work deserve to be seen. Subscribe to Own the Drama for more real stories about ordinary people who faced impossible things and didn't look away. We'll be here when you're ready for the next one.